The past 4 decades have seen the emergence of two distinct approaches to education: privatization of public education and public investment. The privatization of education occurs when governments give public funds to private or privately operated schools. Public investment means using public funds to support educational strategies that both represent the needs and views of communities and that provide opportunities to every student. Privatization took off in the 1970s in Chile. It spread to some countries in the 1990s, like the United States and Sweden, while others like Finland and Cuba continued a public investment strategy in their education systems.
Why is this happening in this country and why is that happening there? In the end, we made a decision to bring into our study 3 pairs.
To really try to make a more apples-to-apples comparison, we were able to find education systems on 3 different continents: Europe, North America, and South America. Very different approaches and very different outcomes. The privatization market-based approach has not worked in Sweden, it has not worked in the United States, and it did not work in Chile. Whereas the public investment approach is actually crucial for the success of Finland, for Ontario and Canada, and for Cuba.
There is a movement afoot to dismantle public education in a number of large urban school districts. Where schools are well funded and well resourced, they do well, and children go on to do well. Where there is disinvestment, then young people end up failing and not doing well.
In the 70s, Salvador Allende was overthrown in a coup by Augusto Pinochet, who implemented a privatization-based agenda across social sectors, including education.
To change education in the country, they brought in the US scholar Milton Friedman that, on top of emphasizing the market, puts the idea of privatization as the mean to change society and provide service and goods for citizens.
The Constitution made a voucher system the way in which education was delivered to the Chilean people. In the time since Chile has instituted the voucher system, we have seen the degradation of teaching as a profession. Teachers' salaries were cut heavily, and the profession as a whole was taken many notches below what it had been.
Overall, Chile's system has produced lower results on international tests.
Con las tomas de los liceos, con las marchas, los paros y las huelgas, estamos buscando erradicar lo que es la educación como un bien de mercado y pasar a tener una lógica social, en que la educación vuelva a ser gratuita, vuelva a estar en manos del Estado, no vuelva a ser una educación segmentatoria. Hoy tenemos una educación que busca segmentar.
We see waves of protests, culminating in a social movement in 2011 with hundreds of thousands of Chileans in the street protesting against the voucher system and educational inequality.
Across Latin America, in Cuba, we see a vastly different system. It is another dictatorship, but with very different educational outcomes for children.
Cuba invests in their education structure to provide a high level of feedback for their teachers so that they can do well in classes, and when they're not doing well, they can be supported in becoming better teachers. That investment has ended up with Cuba literally off the charts performance-wise when you compare it with the rest of Latin America.
Across the globe in Scandinavia, 2 culturally similar countries have vastly different approaches to education and different outcomes. Sweden went from a public system to a market-based system.
Sweden is a fascinating example because most of us consider it the beacon of social democracy, and in fact it has privatized for the last 20 years. The privatization focus has not only not increased education outcomes, but actually increased stratification, decreased the professionalization of teachers, and decreased student outcomes.
After the Second World War, the Swedes said education shall contribute to a democratic society. We will design a school model that draws upon that idea. What happened in the early 1990s was a change in the financial system for schooling, which made it possible for anyone to open up a private school and to get it publicly funded.
And this led to Sweden adopting the school marketplace.
When the Swedes took off with this market-based model, the Finnish colleagues were looking towards Sweden, and they in fact planned, say that, oh, we need to follow the Swedish example. But then suddenly the results of year 2000 came out and showed that Finland had top results, Sweden had not. They became saved by the bell, one could say.
The ideal education system in the world, Finland. What makes their system so good?
Finland's blueprint included a tough national curriculum, master's degrees for all teachers, with up to 3 teachers per class.
Yeah, exercise 7.
The result? There's no such thing as a failing school in Finland.
The Finns made a concrete commitment to equity in education and the approach of providing high quality education to every student as a cornerstone to their education system. The Finns pay for their teachers to go to graduate school. They offer them high quality infrastructure so the working environment is good. It translates into students having the level of attention from a high quality teacher that will produce some of the best outcomes in the world.
Back in North America, the United States and Canada have made different choices.
The U.S. education system today is a diverse system. On the one hand, you have cities that have pursued a privatization agenda, and you have other cities, jurisdictions, and states that have pursued a public investment agenda, and the performance outcomes are quite different.
Since the early 90s, we've been at the mercy of standards and accountability movement, which has pushed measurements to identify failure, testing, ranking, rating, closing, defunding instead of supporting, then taken over. It is really important to understand the connection between that and then privatization.
After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans is the largest example of privatization currently happening in the United States. The district has become predominantly charter run.
When some urban schools in America have low test scores, instead of receiving increased funding and better teachers, they are turned over to private managers that receive public money but have private boards, non-union contracts with teachers, and can often make a profit. Currently, charter schools are the main mechanism for this form of education privatization.
The new charter system incentivizes schools to improve their test scores. The probably best way to improve your test score is to not have low-performing students take the test.
Because charter schools in New Orleans are judged on test scores, they may try to exclude low-performing students through disciplinary actions, not providing special education services, and through other methods.
The move to charter schools has created an increased stratification. The performance of those schools declines on a line down from the type of school it is, the access that certain students, white, wealthy, non-special ed, all of those are grouped into the higher performing schools. To learn from the New Orleans system, I would suggest not applying a model that has been shown to increase stratification, not only in New Orleans, not only in Sweden, but over decades in Chile. And in Chile, and ended up with protests in the street. We're not at that point yet in the United States, even though we are at a small-scale protest place right now.
Not far away, Canada has struggled with the same quandary of public investment versus privatization. They've faced many of the same problems as the United States, but they've chose different solutions democratically.
Privatization is not a done deal. They actually tried to do a neoliberal approach to education in Ontario, and it didn't go well. The teachers felt deprofessionalized, the public wasn't happy, students didn't do well.
In public election in 2003, the future of the school system became a key component. So After that election, they made a change.
The public voted in a democratic fashion that version of education out and implemented a whole system reform model that is based on public investment and that has performed well and increased public satisfaction with education over the last decade. The business approach actually doesn't work in an education sector. The public interest isn't served when privatization is pursued. In all these different cultures and at all these different economic levels, we see the same strategy of public investment outperforming privatization.
Public education is at stake. To lose high-quality public schools in this country has deep impact, I think, on our claim to be a democratic society.
Educational equity in the United States peaked in the 1970s. That is not a trajectory we want to be on. So whatever we're doing right now, if we're not increasing educational equity, we're not delivering on the promise of democracy.
The question remains in the United States, what will we do? We all have a voice. Click on the link below to see what a U.S. student's future might look like and for further ways to engage.